In 2014, Brazil left something called the hunger map. But as we started looking at the data more towards the 2020s, we started to notice that food insecurity was increasing, and in particular, severe or chronic food insecurity, and that the food secure had fallen as a proportion of the population. So really dramatic in less than a decade. But within those data, and really important for us, was something that had perhaps been less noticed, which was that 83% of the food insecure in Brazil were in cities. And this is quite startling. In that 15.5% of severe chronic food insecurity, given the size of Brazil, we're thinking of about 33 million people.
Eu sou a Paulinha, sou coordenadora aqui da Ocupação Vitória, mãe de 3 filhos agora, era 2, agora já veio uma pequenininha aí de 2 meses, a Maia. Então sou mãe de 3 filhos, sou casada, mais uma mulher negra aí na luta, né? Não só por moradia, como também para questão da segurança, a real segurança alimentar, porque às vezes a gente vive aí numa insegurança alimentar, que as pessoas costumam dizer que é segurança alimentar, que é o que falta muito em vários lugares, em várias comunidades, e aqui não é diferente, né?
Food insecurity is when people present themselves as either not having enough food in a nutritional sense, and the availability and access to food. They feel uncertain from where the next meal is coming from. Brazil is a large producer of food in the round, a lot of which is exported. The question is, how is that food then distributed across cities? And can it be accessed by the most vulnerable households in favela and occupation context? The food system itself was segmenting the food distribution market. Essentially, we have this notion, which we wanted to test rather than accept, that there were sort of food deserts in some of the cities. That is, the absence of access to fresh or nutritious food to be replaced by what are often called food swamps, which are low nutrition, high sugar, high fat food options, often culturally unacceptable forms of food. In the Brazilian peripheries, there were a lot of what we call social infrastructures, or people as infrastructure, particularly women in neighbourhoods where people got together to access food, to share rides, to share food itself, and to set up various food programs, from urban gardens on the one hand to food distribution systems on the other.
O coletivo Mulheres do Galo, grupo de agricultura urbana liderado por mulheres, e hoje nós estamos aí, fortalecendo, né, as mulheradas, dando empoderamento feminino, levando renda e principalmente a alimentação, né, alimentação natural, orgânica, tanto para essas mulheres, como para suas famílias, como para a nossa comunidade.
What we were really interested in is how food is also a sort of lens to sort of social and spatial inequalities. And this creates this, or raises this issue of the last mile. The last mile is a way really of sort of thinking through infrastructure exclusions through the notion of food, whether it's the retail environment, whether it's the farming provision, and whether it's the social organisations and the state connect together. The market, if you like, works up to a certain point, but there is often a gap, particularly to the most excluded households and or areas of the city. So the last mile is a somewhat technical term, if you like, which is how households, social organisations, etc. try and close that gap.
Density of food establishments change dramatically depending on where you are in the city of São Paulo. A person who lives in favela typically has 78% less access to food establishments compared to a person who does not live in a favela area. So this is important to understand the challenges and the difficulties of securing food access, and in particular access to nutritious food.
Aqui as pessoas para comprar qualquer coisa aqui tem de ir lá no Extra, na Belmira Marinho. Mas os mercados aqui já são bem mais caros. Vamos supor, o mercado vai ali, compra ali, para revender aqui. Eles não tem como para vender o mesmo preço do Extra. Sempre o preço é a metade ou 70% mais caro. Então as pessoas deslocavam para comprar lá, né?
Both the UK-based team and the Brazil-based team were interested in mapping food security in urban peripheries in Brazil. However, we had different focuses, so whereas the UK team was interested in the more everyday practices, the communities, the household, the individuals, as well as the organizations and how people access food in their everyday lives. Insper was more interested in mapping the retail environment, right? The businesses and the supply chains that was bringing food to these communities. In the research, we focused on 5 neighborhoods, 3 of them in São Paulo, which is Paraisópolis, União de Vila Nova, and Anchieta. And in Belo Horizonte, there are 2 communities. One of them is Vitória, and the other one is Taquaril.
So in Brazil, the cities have been produced through a process that we call peripheral urbanization. Which means that a lot of the neighborhoods, specifically the ones which are inhabited by marginalized, low-income, racialized communities, have been self-built. So that process of peripheral urbanization has led to very segregated cities, where you have entire neighborhoods which have very low access to infrastructures, which we believe are very relevant to understand food access. So for instance, if you don't have public transport, if you don't have roads, electricity, if you don't have access to water, all of those lacks leads to further constraints for food access.
Olha, acho que o maior desafio nosso hoje é a regularização fundiária. 9 anos aqui dentro, nós não temos ainda esgoto, água, luz, né, ruas, porque nem todo lugar a ambulância não entra, corpo de bombeiro não entra.
But there is another problem, which is stigma. Favelas, informal settlements, urban occupations are all perceived as sort of like areas of risk. And you have, during the pandemic, situations in which a truck full of food parcels for donation inside the community would go to the border of the community and say, we're not coming in.
A gente passou por uma situação que o motorista com 500 cestas básicas parou na entrada da comunidade e queria descarregar lá. E a gente fazia a entrega aqui embaixo. Então, assim, é muita distância. Ele não quis entrar dentro da comunidade, mas foi muito constrangedor, muito triste, humilhante pra gente. Pra pessoa não querer entrar porque é estrada de terra. Tem também aquela questão de marginalizar, né? Porque nós ocupantes somos muito marginalizados. Às vezes as pessoas falam, eu moro na ocupação, já olha diferente pra gente.
COVID changed the realities of the communities that were doing research. A lot of people lost their jobs, lost their incomes, and this transformed as well the object of the research in itself, which was access to food. Because rather than just reflecting about the retail environment, the last mile, now we had to think about this drastic event that was affecting people's lives in so many different ways, and especially food was an area that was strongly affected by loss of jobs, inflation, and also reduced mobility.
Quando começou a pandemia, a gente ficou com muito medo. A gente até fez um trabalho de prevenção aqui dentro da comunidade, junto com o GAIC, né, o professor Buiu. A gente, junto com o Instituto também, né, porque a gente tinha muito medo. Por quê? Aqui nós temos um barraco de 4x4, 5x4, que é um barraquinho, né? E dentro do barraco desse de madeira, morava 8, 9 pessoas, 7 pessoas. Logo no início, quando começou, né, os primeiros 2 meses não foi tão fácil, mas depois as empresas começaram a se mover, mandar muitas doações. Aí nós tínhamos bastante doação, né? Nós tínhamos a doação da CUFA, nós tínhamos a doação da Associação K.
The Campo Favela project was established to connect small family farmers with low-income areas, especially the favelas. Within the favelas, we used residents' associations to handle the distribution of fresh food. By January 2021, we had collected over 3 million Brazilian reais in donations and bought about 700 tons of food from more than 1,500 small-scale family farmers. We distributed all this food to 80,000 families in these low-income areas.
Então o Campo Favela trouxe para nós, além da abundância da comida, a felicidade. É esse cenário que eu sempre falei do Campo Favela.
Hunger is a very objective sense of deprivation that people feel. It's very material, right? It's an embodied feeling. And many of our participants in São Paulo, but also in Belo Horizonte, experienced hunger growing up. This was part of the living memory of these communities, of the people that lived there. And I think that what the leaders are saying is that, okay, when they realized that a lot of people were going to lose their jobs, that their incomes were going to be reduced, it's hunger that they fear the most, especially because in the beginning people did not know how COVID was going to pan out as a disease. No one knew, right? But I think that what happened was that they knew what hunger was and that they knew that this could come. And they knew that this could be very hard on them, and that's a problem that they had been fighting for so long and they thought it was behind them. So I think that this is one of the reasons why this was a very, very real fear to them, right? Whereas COVID could be something they didn't know what it was. Food has so many different dimensions which are beyond just the strictly nutritional, and we wanted to reflect both. If people were actually satisfying their nutritional needs, but if they were also satisfying their emotional needs that come through food as well.
Houve a pandemia, houve uma abundância de alimentos, de doações. Depois vem o processo da flexibilização. Aí aumentou o tamanho da fome, porque as pessoas pararam de doar, porque a flexibilidade da pandemia, as pessoas acharam que estava tudo legal e não estavam.
A pandemia acabou, as doações não vem mais, muito pouco, quase nada, não tem mais. Doações realmente acabou. E agora, o que eu percebo é que as pessoas estão passando fome. É a realidade aqui dentro do Anchieta hoje. Teve uma fartura e essa fartura passou, essa maré de fartura acabou. E agora está vindo a necessidade. Até porque tem muita gente desempregada. E assim, eu acho que a fome de novembro para cá foi o pior tempo de fome que eu já vi, que a gente atendeu, foi agora. Porque agora é que as coisas apertou mesmo. Porque antigamente as pessoas pediam cesta. Hoje as pessoas pedem um pacote de arroz, meio pacote, e a gente não tem para dar.
What happened at the end is that we were able to look into how people's everyday was transformed by the pandemic from very up close, through people's own reflections of the pandemic, of its effect on their lives.
I think one of the main research findings for us was find out that women are the ones closing that last mile gap. Women which are, using that time to provide for their families. They are working, they are taking care of the domestic work in the household, and that includes food access. And what we saw during the pandemic is that role was worsened. What we think is necessary is for a recognition of the role of those communities and the community leaders to be included in any kind of initiative that would try and address food insecurity in urban Brazil. You need to provide those projects that we were looking at, the urban gardens, the community kitchens, with a constant stream of resources so they can still operate without relying on the solidarity of individuals and businesses. And there are some steps towards that already in Brazil happening, but I think it's not enough.
To overcome these challenges, it is necessary to adopt creative and tailored approaches, such as involving the local community, utilizing local careers familiar with the area. Collaborations among local organizations, governments, and private enterprise can also play an important role in enhancing the distribution of fresh products within favelas.
You might see rice, chicken and beans on the plate, but how it got there and whether it will get there tomorrow, not simply because people don't have $2 in their pocket, or it's not available in the shop because it is. It's because you don't have the electricity, or you don't have the gas, or you don't have the time. The idea of food insecurity is not something that just relates to food. Yes, no. It's about your reliability of your neighbour. It's about the trustworthiness of your neighbourhood association president. And all of those types of things sort of turn on and turn off for many households.